What's good everyone, it's Zigzag here, welcome back to another Geoguessr video. Great to have you back on the channel today, and welcome to my top 10 players of 2024. It's now 2025, so we can look back on the year that's passed. I would call it the year that Geoguessr truly became an esport, but surprisingly enough, because there were less tournaments outside of the World Cup this year, I actually found it harder to compile a top 10. Regardless, we're going to start at 10, go through to 1. In the middle, I'll give some honorable mentions, and just one more thing to say before we get into it. I'm rating No Moving and NMPZ higher than Moving, because outside of World Cup, in the circles I move in, Moving is just less relevant. So though there are very many skilled Moving mains, I will not be including them in the list. Anyway, let's get into it. So my number 10 pick for 2024 is Karonia, a fellow countryman of mine. His biggest achievement for the year was winning the APAC tournament, the Asia Pacific tournament. He did so in dominant fashion, beating Angelo 3-0 to get there. He also had a decent World Cup where he placed 9th to 12th, getting eliminated by foul. And at least once or twice this year, he reached number 1 overall on Jules ranking. And spoiler, this year I'm going to be using Jules ranking a lot more than I did last year because of the introduction of all 3 modes in Jules. And trickling down from that, most pros do at least play some Jules these days, so it is much more relevant. But yeah, overall, Karonia, a very consistent player. He also evolved a lot throughout the year, heavily improving his moving skills, perhaps to the detriment of his NMPZ skills. But let's not forget that the World Cup format does benefit moving anyway, so it makes sense. My number 9 pick might be surprising to more casual viewers, but it's actually another fellow Australian, Lero. So Lero got quite unfortunate at the APAC tournament and therefore missed out at the World Cup. So this is definitely less of a results-based pick and much more of an eye test-based pick. So Lero is an extremely consistent No Moving and NMPZ player, and he's been extremely high rated on Jules for pretty much the entire year, maintaining around 2000 ELO, and just like Karonia has been up to number 1 as well. As of the 1st of January, he's 5th on the NMPZ leaderboard and 6th on the No Moving leaderboard, and has not played many games in the World League so far, so we'll just have to see how he goes. But yeah, perhaps a surprising pick. I think if you ask pros though, they would agree with me that he is definitely one of the best players in the world, and so I've placed him at 9. Alright, coming in at number 8, we have the Spanish player Totic. Now, Totic is one of the most veteran players on this list without a doubt, being there right since the start of the community, and he actually won the EMEA tournament this year, which was one of the most stacked tournaments of the entire year. Of course, he beat Consus to get there, and Blinky was eliminated on the other side of the bracket, so he ended up beating Kratzo in the finals. And he wouldn't be top 10 on that alone, but he actually made it to the grand stage of the World Cup, which was very impressive, and those 2 feats really pushed him into the top 10 for me. Sadly, Totic declined his invite to the World League, so it's unlikely that we're going to see him in the World Cup 2025. That being said, it was a very fitting year for Totic to finish on this year, with frankly his best ever year of results Geoguessr-wise. So my number 7 pick this year is Consus, and may I say that the next 7 were definitely the clear top 7. For number 8 to 10, I kind of struggled to come up with exactly who I wanted. I think those ones are much more debatable. Everyone Consus and above is in kind of their own league, and these guys were definitely closer together and a bunch above the rest. Anyway, Consus was my top player of 2023. In 2024, he continued to show a lot of strength without getting the results he probably wanted. He was top 8 in EMEA, and then again top 8 in the Geoguessr World Cup. He's also having a flying start to the World League, currently 10-0. We'll see how that pans out over the rest of the league, but you'd have to think he is very likely to qualify for one of the 16 positions in the Geoguessr World Cup 2025. And overall, you could call Consus one of the most consistent players in the world. It is very rare that you see him make a big mistake, and he is just a measured, cool-headed, and very strong player. I would not be surprised to see Consus bounce back, and indeed, probably many people on their own list would put Consus even higher, just the way I place things here. Definitely Consus should still be proud of his 2024, and I want to see him bounce back next year. Alright, my number 6 player of the year is Shimmy from Slovenia. Shimmy is also bumped down a few spots. I believe he was 3rd last year on my list. And yeah, this also might be a little bit controversial because Shimmy is a bit inactive as of the end of 2024. He hasn't been playing too much in the last 4 months. That being said, like Lero, this is kind of an eye test one. I still believe that Shimmy is, if not the, one of the best NMPZ players in the world, certainly top 3. He has set some of the most impressive world records. I'm still, after a lot of grinding, yet yet to beat a Shimmy world record. And yeah, this is just a player for whom it's a shame he doesn't play in the World Cup. He doesn't like the format. He doesn't like the moving aspect as far as I know. So yeah, fair enough on that, I would say. Hopefully we see him on a LAN environment one day. But I would say even without significant placements this year, he is still my 6th best player of the year. And in addition to that, he still is the player in the world with the most games completed, having completed over 50,000 games. Very impressive stuff. All right, before we get to number 5, let's talk about some honorable mentions, and I'll give a quick sentence about each player on the list. Firstly, Gingy, who won the Americas tournament and has been extremely consistent in third-party tournaments, so the smaller tournaments that happen on the side in the community. Definitely an NMPZ no-move player, not so strong on the moving side of things. Has hurt him in the World Cup, for example. Definitely a player, though, I have a lot of respect for. Castrola, aka V89, is definitely someone else who many people would have had on the list. He had a high elo peak at the start of the year, but has since had a less active second half of the year and is currently going quite well in the World League without being a front runner. We all know Debray. Debray had a little bit of an underwhelming year this year considering his skill level. I definitely think we could see Debray in the top 10 next year. I think with Debray, it all depends on how much he dedicates himself because he is very strong on all 3 game modes and has a habit of beating me in the World Cup, which he has done twice now. Kron is a young Hong Kongolese player, hasn't therefore been able to play in the World Cups. Definitely someone who was very cracked, but I think has stopped grinding quite so much at the moment. But Kron would definitely just show up to these third-party tournaments and destroy them every now and again, so have to give him a shout out. Moo is someone who missed out on the World Cup this year, but has since had a huge rise to being a top player and is currently going very well in the World League as well. Not top 10 this year, but definitely might be next year, I think. Orlando had a big rise to Geoguessr fame this year, also making it to the top 4 of the World Cup was absolutely insane. A great result for him. I definitely think with a bit more consistency, he could be top 10 next year. Barry the Bee is a really young player from the US. He's got a high Jules elo a lot of the time, but not too much else to his name. So if you're going Jules alone, he might be top 10. However, with the results-based system, not really possible. Same applies for Yuria, who is a teenager from Japan. Exactly the same deal as Barry the Bee. Emshanov from Russia has become arguably a top 10 NMPZ player in the world at the moment. However, also doesn't really have the other results to back it up. Also, being Russian, not able to play in the World Cup as it stands, I believe. My second last honorable mention is my good friend Finbar. Definitely had quite a breakout year in the pro scene this year, doing well in EMEA and decently at the World Cup. He's also quite high elo, however, didn't quite have the results to justify putting him on the list. And my final honorable mention would be me. Now, I did do really well in terms of world records this year. However, I weighted them a lot less because Plonker has been a lot less active recently. I would say there could be an argument to put me at the bottom of the top 10, but personally, I didn't think it was justified this year. Guys, fingers crossed, I can confidently put myself on there next year. But let's get on to number 5. My number 5 pick is the British player Geo. Now, if you're a World Cup watcher, this is someone you may have never heard of. However, Geo is the number 1 rated player in the world in terms of overall rating by over 150 points at this stage, which is kind of crazy. In addition to that, he's the number 1 rated on No Moving and on NMPZ. So overall, he's had a huge year on Jules. This is a similar story to Barry the Bee and Yuria, except Geo is just better, and therefore basically just on minor tournaments and Jules stats alone has earned himself a top 10 spot. Okay, my number 4 pick. Now, this one also may come as a surprise, but I'm actually going to go with Bag at Geoguessr. Now, Bag actually qualified for the World Cup through the wildcards and then got in the group of death with me. Now, we both went out in the group stage there, but let me tell you why Bag is so high on the list. He's had an incredibly dominant year in Jules, where he's been top 3 basically the entire year long. He's also top 3 in multiple Plonker record categories, and is basically a top 3 NMPZ player in the world, I would say pretty easily. And yeah, guys, I think if the World Cup format was a bit different, we could easily have seen Bag be top 4 in the entire thing. In fact, many people had him going top 4 before the World Cup actually started, but the group of death happened to him, and he unfortunately was eliminated early. He wouldn't have been in other groups, in my opinion, but that's how it goes, and Bag is my number 4 player of the year. My number 3 player of the year, and I can tell you this guy was nowhere on my radar last year when I made the list, but it is of course MK Person. Now MK famously made it through the wildcards and then all the way to the World Cup Grand Final, and he very nearly beat Blinky on NMPZ, which would have crowned him the world champion of Geoguessr. That would have been quite an insane story. Regardless, it still is an insane story that an 18-year-old can come through from playing on his phone just a year and a half earlier all the way to being one of the top 3 players in the world. MK, pat on the back back, bro. Well done on earning this top 3. In addition to what I just said, MK has been consistently in the top 3 of duels as well, holding number 1 for quite some time. He definitely has a lot of holes in his gameplay. He's not very good at moving. He's not very good at small countries, but what he lacks there, he has an extreme consistency on the bigger countries and also very quick guessing, which often throws his opponents. And that's why MK is number 3. My number 2 pick, and I really was unsure who I wanted to go with 2 and 1, which order I would pick, but my number 2 pick this year is Radu C. So Radu was representing US instead of Romania this year, and therefore, because he couldn't play in the Americas qualifier, had to go through the wildcards as well, which of course he did with relative ease over in Andorra, and when it came to the World Cup group stage, he was absolutely destroying. However, on the big stage, he had an upset loss to Foul. Now, you could definitely argue that Radu played better in the series, but regardless, Foul was the winner, and so Radu, while many people's favorites to win the whole thing, did not make it to the grand finals, unfortunately. That being said, the rest of the year was punctuated by Radu's success after Radu's success. He spent probably the first half of the year as the number 1 rated player in the world, and I think you could definitely call him the best player in the world at the no moving mode as well. And Radu is of course the best player in the world at multiple countries, if not top 3, which makes him very formidable when you roll a Ukraine or a Bangladesh in a duel against him. But yeah, along with my number 1 pick, Radu is the most complete player in the world, and therefore highly to be feared in the World Cup format, and we really got to watch out for him at the next World Cup, which based on his World League performances so far, he will almost certainly qualify for. And my number 1 pick of the year is, of course, Blinky, our world champion. I decided to stick with tradition here and pick Blinky over Radu, just like I picked Consus over Blinky last year. And yeah, Blinky had a stellar year this year, unfortunately missing out on the win, losing to his French compatriot in EMEA. And at that stage, I was thinking, okay, maybe Blinky's year won't quite go the way it did last year. However, after months of solid grinding, we rolled up to the World Cup, and he was my prediction to actually win the whole thing. The reason being because, as I said, Blinky is the most complete player in the world along with Radu. He's extremely good, in fact the best at moving, and then his No Moving and NMPZ are definitely top 10 if not top 5, if not higher. So yeah, Blinky, a super smart player, the complete package, and a deserving World Cup 2024 winner. I definitely loved the storyline of him going on to win the World Cup. It was very poetic. I was super happy for him, as you guys would have seen if you watched that. I was jumping around with Kodiak and Lenley. I do think it has to be said, the World Cup format does heavily benefit Blinky with the inclusion of moving, but at this stage, the Geoguessr devs are definitely set on this format, so them's the rules. If you can't beat Blinky, you can't beat Blinky, and that's why he is number 1 on my list this year. Okay, so let's talk about my bold predictions from last year and who I think will make the top 10 next year. This is my list. You can see who made the top 10 from my list last year. Karonia and Lero, the 2 moving into the top 10 from this list, but many others such as Antec, definitely world-class players who kind of stopped grinding quite as much. Same goes for Kron really, so definitely could have been top 10 if they kept playing. And so as for the people who've never made top 10 on my lists, but I think might next year, here is my list. I got Kron again, Moo, Barry the Bee, Uria, Dev, Kent, who I think is quite underrated in the World League at the moment, Finbar, Captain, who's a big unknown in the World League, seems to be playing really well so far, Harrier, and Lenley. There are definitely very many others who I could have included here, but I think at least some of those will make the top 10 next year, in addition to the people who I already had in the top 7 this year, who I really think were quite interchangeable. So sorry if you disagreed with any of the order there, but that is it for the video. Let us see how I go in terms of these predictions. I'm very keen to see how they pan out. And on a happy note, I think that the Geoguessr esports scene is going really well. I'm not always happy with the decisions of the devs or the format, but I am definitely still grateful for the opportunity and very happy to be part of it. So let's see if I can also make the top 10 next year. I would love to. Guys, thank you so much for watching the video all the way to the end. Have a great new year, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.